Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
I'm your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader in all things CI and CD. Today, I'm joined by Pat Kua, engineering leader, author, coach, speaker, author of the LevelUp newsletter. I don't know. The list is ridiculous. I'll probably just stop there. But very storied, very out there, helping people, helping leaders. So tons and tons to talk about. So excited to talk to you today, Pat. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yeah, this is gonna be great. I mean, I say that a lot, but I know it is. I commented on this before we got on, but one of your books, at least I could see over your head. This is a little fuzzy in the background, and obviously, this is not everyone's watching it on video. But Building Evolutionary Architectures, which I read when it came out, just huge contributions everywhere, which I'll say I love, and I'm sure many people appreciate. Right, like it's one thing to learn all these lessons, whether it's technology, leadership, whatever. It's another to get out there and share them with the world and help other people grow. So on behalf of everyone listening, thank you for all of that. So let's jump right in. I mean, you spend a lot of time, as I said, helping, supporting, coaching. And so I'm sure a lot of time with engineering leaders these days. Times are turbulent. We've been saying that for a bit, probably since
constant about it industry.
Yeah, but I feel like 2020 was also turbulent, but 2020, was the beginning of just like a lot of different shifts. And we're in one right now. The market is changing. AI is changing the way we think about software delivery. A lot of things are changing. So as described, you spend a lot of time supporting folks, training, coaching, working with leaders. What's it like for those leaders right now to be leading in an industry where everything is sort of, up for grabs, everything feels a little bit turbulent and uncertain? What kinds of problems are you helping folks with, and kind of what experience would you say they're going through?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I get to see it from two perspectives generally, because I do a lot of training sort of workshops for early stage technical leaders and managers. So people who are transitioning from being an individual contributor to being like a tech lead, staff engineer, or engineering manager. And then I do one-to-one coaching with CTOs and VPs of Engineering. And when I think about this question, I sort of think about two sorts of categories. I think one category is everyone struggles with the same things again and again. So it's kind of the evergreen topics. And it's one of the reasons I love doing the things that I do, because, I never had any real support when I was going through my own leadership management journey. I had to sort of work it all out. And I get to work with organizations who are investing in people to help them understand, as you step into a leadership or a management roles, the expectations change, therefore the skills change. And there's naturally going to be some things that you've probably never done before that are going to feel a lot harder, particularly for technical people who have to particularly manage other people. Some of those really tough people conversations can be really hard and challenging for the first few times. They never sort of get easier, but you end up building up a bit more of a toolkit, and you maybe have some less surprises from that side. Similarly, for a lot of the CTOs and VPs of engineering sort of roles, I think a lot of people, before they step into that role, they think, oh, well, all CTO and VP engineering roles are exactly the same. But it's really, really different, both by the sort of domain or the type of product company they're in, the size of the company that they're in, and also kind of the stage or, the challenges that the organization are having. And so, for the CTOs and VPs of engineering, one of the sort of common things that I often have a lot of conversations with is like, what should you be doing, right? So where should you be spending your time? And that can really change from sort of month to month and be really dynamic. But as you mentioned, that there was a lot of changes to our industry, and there's some new things that have sort of come in. And I think one of the ones that, everyone's talking about is definitely AI. And I'm kind of lucky enough because I get to work with so many different organizations where I tend to sort of see some organizations that are maybe more risk-taking or sort of all in on AI, going in with full experimentation and, like they're going full steam in, just trying to work out what makes sense. I work with some other clients who are maybe a little bit more conservative, or particularly some of the enterprises. They're obviously worried with large customer bases or risk to existing clients about maybe taking too much of a leap, and their experiments tend to be a little bit more contained rather than just rolling it out in the entire organization. But at every level, everyone's trying to work out what's the impact. How do I maybe justify either getting budget for this or how we use that budget? And also, the discrepancy that probably a lot of people have talked about on this podcast, which is, the overblown expectations that, a lot of particularly business or commercial people have who don't really understand the technology versus the reality of, what people are actually experiencing on the ground. And it's always been the role of technical leaders, be at a CTO or at a sort of tech lead level, working with a product manager, of trying to translate, those maybe overblown expectations into what is actually happening on the ground, and to sort of base it on data. And I think that's a huge challenge for everyone, because that is shifting a lot. And there's some really good places that are starting to publish data and research, but even that is still very early days in terms of, small sample sizes or small domains and things like that. So I think there's a lot of different challenges, but I think that's also one of the exciting things about a lot of the roles that the people that I get to support is I like to remind people, if every day was exactly the same, then you're not really learning and growing as well, right? And so I think that's one of the exciting things about our industry. It does change all the time, but I think it also means that it's good opportunities for continuous growth.
Yeah, that's a great way of framing it. I mean, times of rapid change are times of rapid growth personally, right? You just experimenting with new things, learning new things. We've been really into this whole notion of we are engineers and kind of what makes people engineers. And I think that's part of it, the curiosity and the interest and the just the desire to learn new things. So I do think it's an exciting time, but it can be troubling, right? Times of a lot of shift for individuals can be, there's a lot of questions. And actually, you made me think of something in sort of discussing the various levels that you support, right? And at a time when CTOs and VPs of engineering are looking at a market and going, oh my goodness, what's happening? What should we be doing? That can be really troubling, I think, for lower level managers who are sort of maybe just learning the ropes or whatever, but also feeling like, I don't know my role in this. I don't really have a lot of agency to make any change, but I get the sense that not everyone knows what we're doing. That is I think a particularly difficult thing to navigate, as that sort of line manager or somewhere in between. Is that something that you see folks facing? And is there kind of anything that you're recommending to them as ways to navigate that with their teams, or to the leaders to acknowledge that and help those managers navigate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, this is one of the probably defining characteristics of, I think, a good leader, which I think is always living in a scope of uncertainty. I think, for example, one of the challenges a lot of people have moving from being an individual contributor to leading or managing is they're often used to a high degree of certainty, right? So you can write a test, it goes red, and you can get something to pass, even if you're generating code or not, to go green. When you deploy software, you normally have indicators whether it's working or not working. It's again red or green. It's very binary, and I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have when they step into leadership roles is, firstly, you never have perfect information. And so sort of hoping that you can design the perfect solution, be it a team structure or a process, given you have many different people's opinions or what's going on in the organization, there's always some level of uncertainty there. As you alluded to, I think, what happens when your organization doesn't know what they're doing. I've, seen this a lot, even outside of the world of AI, which when it comes down to, say, business priorities or business strategy, right? Often a lot of technologists have to work out, well, we have to build something. We have to come up with a technical strategy, but maybe it's not quite clear where our business is going because they don't really know, or it doesn't feel like they know there as well. And so I think there's always been some level of uncertainty there. And it happens at every level as well, be it a CTO and you're working with your executives and, the business strategy is growth, not really a real strategy, but, that's a goal, sure. But about how you're actually going to achieve that and what bets you're going to make and what direction that you're going to actually invest in and what things you're not going to say or you're going to say no to. But I think part of the challenge of being a leader is trying to navigate that that uncertainty. And I like to help people think about their role as like creating more certainty throughout. So Andy Grove in his book, The High Output Management, talked about the role of managers of making decisions, or I like to help them say you enable making decisions. It doesn't have to be you, but it often means, again, doing your homework, collecting data about what things are out there, trying to sort of craft that into at least perhaps options or a set of potential things that you can pursue, thinking about the trade-offs, but then again, time boxing that so that you can actually make some decisions around that. And I think that's a useful strategy in every sort of perspective here, which is if we had perfect information, if we had perfect time, if we had all the resources in the world, which we never do, then you might be able to come up with a perfect decision, but we don't. And so that's part of the role of leaders, of like helping your teams and organizations make decisions. And, we can apply a lot of the engineering mindset to this as well. So, when we talked about like evolutionary architecture, we talk about like making the change sort of reversible, and finding ways to sort of split that difference between, say, design decisions versus architecturally significant decisions. And the sort of smaller you can make, those decisions, and the more reversible you can, then it should be easy to make it as well, right? And so there's some of the techniques I think that it can be really helpful for people navigating this path of uncertainty.
Yeah, I love that framing in particular. You said if we had all the time in the world and perfect data and whatever, I still think we would make the wrong decision. So we might it's really useful to embrace that, right? And say, okay, well, how can we do something instead of sitting around talking about it, and use that action to get better information, right? Like we make this architectural change, we make this organizational change, whatever, and we'll know pretty quickly. Again, I'm with you on the time horizons of sort of org structure and, larger decisions, but we should get some feedback that then gives us better information that allows us to adapt, right? And if you take that mindset, you can take that again at your team level, at your sort of system level, whatever it might be. I think that feels like a big liberating moment for a lot of people, which is just saying, you know what, it doesn't matter how much information we have. We're still gonna be guessing. So let's just try something, right? Absolutely. And trying something, like getting movement, is delightful. Yeah. Sitting and worrying is not delightful.
Absolutely. And I think you're bringing a great point here as well, because I think it's really important to get data in your context, because I think too many people are like, oh, what do the FANG companies do? What do, maybe not Uber now, but like, Stripe or like Spotify do? And like, let's copy them. But, your team is different. And yes, there are some similarities, that everything's maybe technology, but, your context is different. And I think if you can get that decision to get data in your context, that'll help you make some better decisions about maybe it's not the right choice for your current context, but maybe it'll help you make a better decision for you and your team. Yeah.
I think one of the, you mentioned, as you were mentioning, some different tools and whatever, like two maybe failure modes that I've witnessed a lot as well. One, massive organization, open sources something and everyone's like, oh, look, they were successful because they use this. Totally not the fact. Let's use it. And it's completely over designed for the thing that you need for your tiny little startup, or even your mid-sized company or whatever. Like, and that's true of organizations as well. Like you mentioned Spotify in there, and they pretty famously put out the Spotify model, and I'm pretty sure pivoted away from it 3 months later, but they weren't obligated to tell the world, hey, now we're trying this, now we're trying this, hey, this part didn't work, whatever. It's like, oh, we made some nice videos, so we'll just let that sit out there. And people get dogmatic about using something they learned from another organization, which, to your point, didn't even make sense for them in the first place. But even that organization's context has changed, right? Or that was an experiment. They said, hey, let's go try something. Oh, that part didn't work, that part didn't work, let's tweak it. But again, there's not that obligation to keep like putting out new versions and updates. Hey, everybody, we want you to know this didn't work for us. Like, you got to just pick some of these things, try them out, see what works in your organization, and then adjust.
Yeah, and I think that's a real good example for me of like true agile thinking. I think a lot of people get obsessed with methodology, and I was really lucky enough to be around, well, maybe in the sort of pre-agile world of like waterfall development, right? Like huge 9-12 month release cycles, really painful release processes. And, today we've got like platforms like yourselves that can help us ship daily or like hourly, even faster. But I think that agile mindset still makes a lot of sense. So even though you can maybe release small changes really rapidly, you still have people that are like on sort of feature branches for weeks or months, right? And not doing true continuous integration. And I think that experimentation mindset is really important, of like doing small things and shipping small ideas, testing that, getting that real data, and then adapting again. And I think for me, that's really that true agile mindset.
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was there too. With the multi-year releases or not releases sometimes, like work on something for 2 years and then go, I don't think anybody wants this. The reason nobody wants this because we were wrong 2 years ago, but we kept charging down that path, right? But one thing that I always think about with that is like now you're starting now, you're talking about sort of young leaders and you talked about your sort of, journey and just like you didn't use this word, but let's call them battle scars, like trying all different things and being like, well, that doesn't work, but this works, and that doesn't work, but this works. And I feel like there's some of that from, those waterfall days where like my association with value, appreciation for agile methodologies is sort of correlated to or driven by the pain that I felt, right? But doing it another way. And I wonder, like, I would never say, hey, go do waterfall for 3 years so you could truly appreciate how awesome your life is. But I wonder if we lose some of that context, right? Once we've shifted these approaches, and maybe that's, again, management, like someone shows up and just tells you do these 5 things, and you're like, great, that's how I do management, right? But because you're not coming from that, well, I tried these other 10 and they definitely did not work. So is there, I don't know, is there something that you bring to those conversations? Is there an approach that that helps people understand kind of why we do things these ways now, as opposed to like, I just make the Jira cards and I put stuff in CI, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, because like I go back to thinking about, would I have wanted to written programs in, say, assembler or like machine code? Probably not. And I never got to that level. I remember doing a little bit of university stuff of like building a programming language to understand what this is like, but I don't feel like I need to go through that pain to really do that. And I think for me, one of the important things when I'm sort of teaching people is helping people to understand like the pain behind that. And you're right, which I think sometimes people have to live some of that pain to understand the challenges of that. When it comes to some of the methodology stuff, I think it's still valid that people still live out that pain. So again, somebody might be doing CI/CD, but maybe they're not doing real trunk-based development where they're merging into mainline daily and they leave their feature branch again for like months. They will feel a lot of that merge pain when they, finally integrate it with their buddies, not really doing like real continuous integration, even though they have some of the tools and the techniques there. And I think sometimes people have to live through that pain there as well, right? I don't necessarily think everyone has to go back to the large planning phases, but even in today's world, I still see teams, and sometimes I get asked to do consulting, which I no longer do, of like, we've been trying to do this rewrite, like platform rewrites. Oh my goodness. Right. That's a real good example of a classic waterfall approach that a lot of engineering leaders take. And maybe because they haven't taken that agile mindset, they've not been thinking about how do they sort of de-risk it, break it down into small incremental sort of steps and like try to learn from that. And they just like take it on we're going to rewrite this platform in 2 years, which is never 2 years. It's like much, much longer. And sometimes people have to go through that pain. I don't think everyone should have to. And I wish people didn't have to do that. But I think some of that stuff is still completely valid. So if I think about today's world of like with artificial intelligence, right? So I think being able to work in small cycles and to do small tests, some of those practices that come with good agile software development, like TDD, is going to be really useful when you're dealing with a whole bunch of generated code, right? Like trying to debug reams and reams of code is still a pain, whether it's generated or not, probably even more of a pain because you have no idea what went into it. And it's going to take even longer. So, some of this will be a learning experience. And I think it's on all engineering leaders to make sure that people have that safe space where they can learn from that. But also, again, to try to have some forcing functions. We talk about sort of fitness functions in software, but when I think about leadership management, I like to think about forcing functions in terms of policies or processes that allow people to learn from that. So, don't give people like 12 weeks to go off and like release a feature, even though that they might be doing CI/CD, but, really thinking about getting people to, show customer value, like facing features in a week or 2 weeks, right? Short cycles. And if they are struggling to do that, then that gives you a point to say, what's going on? A point of reflection of saying, like, are our processes working, or do we need to inspect and adapt? And I think those sort of short cycles are still really, really valuable lessons learned that you can sort of still translate to today's world.
Yeah. Well, there's a ton in there. And one thing that came up for me is you're talking about do I need to go back and learn assembler in order to appreciate, whatever. I don't. So many things have happened since then, right? But like, I was gonna say not having to do memory management, but like you could go back only to C and be like, oh right, no, people are still doing this, or C++. Like, pretty sure that's Rust. How your self-driven car was created. Yeah, exactly. And so, but one of the concerns I think that's come up a lot in the transition to AI is this question of how do we develop juniors, right? And there's excellent points along there. Like I didn't spend a lot of time writing assembler either. Spent a decent amount of time writing C, and therefore appreciate, languages where I can get things done a lot faster. And I don't think that role goes away. I mean, you're going to learn differently. You're going to have to be curious and kind of pay attention to what's happening. The other thing that I was thinking about, like maybe don't go do a couple years of waterfall, but if you might be in sort of the situation that you were just describing and not know it, right? And I think it's really valuable to see super high performing teams one way or another. And like, unfortunately, we're really good at talking about these things and projecting outwards that we have high performance when we have like massive dysfunction, but really like sitting in and experiencing. I was thinking about when I first tried continuous deployment, it was like 2011, something like that. I was like, this is a terrible idea. It's never going to work. And then we did it because we were a small startup and we didn't really have customers or high risk at the time. And I would never go back, right? I was like, to that point of coming from basically waterfall not long before that to this, we can get up in the morning and ship a feature by the afternoon sort of thing. Why would you want to do anything different, But I think that only comes from once you've seen it, like once you've really felt speed like that, then you know what it's like and it's achievable. And then you are distressed whenever you don't see it. Yeah. And I think a lot of people think they're doing it. Right. And so if you can get the opportunity to go find someone who's really, really doing it, like really good at it, then that changes your whole worldview. And maybe you can do that without having to go spend 2 years, shipping something off of a PRD and an MRD with like 700 signatures on it that said, yes, this is exactly what we're doing. Every single one of these features is exactly right. We know what the world is going to look like in 2 years. Like in 2025, try to imagine yourself convincing someone that we know 2 years from now, this will be the perfect product, right? It just sounds.
Yeah, it's never going to happen.
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous.
And I think you're right, which is, I think sometimes like teams do get isolated, and I see some organizations are better than others at being able to sort of promote that. And so there's a few things that people can do. Kind of depends on your organization. If you're a larger enterprise, you're going to have a lot of different product teams. And so one way that you can learn from maybe high performing teams is some organizations do internal rotation programs where even if it's not like a permanent transfer, but even shadowing another team for a week or whatever, or even for a temporary initiative like a project, then it often gives people a good chance to sort of serendipitously learn, why are you doing it like that? Like, that's really different from how we do it. Like, how can you like ship stuff like hundreds of times a day, right? Like, it's a great way for that organic sort of learning sort of process. That's a little bit more difficult if you're a smaller, say, startup or things like that. And then what I think of high performing or learning organizations from that perspective, they also recognize that, staying in a bubble like themselves also means that they become a bit isolated. And this is where you can maybe also, again, maybe not shadow, but you can sometimes organize a sort of visit to another company, or like if, two engineering managers become a bit of a buddy, they can often say, hey, can I like get one of my people to join your team for a day at least and see how you deal with your releases, right? Or how you do security patching or something like that, and sort of inverse as a bit of a sort of swap. And I think it's really important in today's world. That's like, I think it's one of the great things I love about tech is that we've been really generous with our knowledge. You know, everything from open sourcing to writing about blogs and like technical things, just because it's a really hard job. It's just so complex, right? And like now we have everyone with probably the TikToks and the YouTubes, I don't know, different generation. But, you know, I think there's so much stuff that we can learn from other people, but it's important that particularly the leaders and managers foster an environment where it's okay to explore outside of your team and to make sure that there's some time within an organization to be able to at least learn some of that.
Yeah, I think that's great thinking. Like you mentioned the larger organization and sort of cross-pollination, stuff like that. But yeah, you get into small teams, small companies, and you feel like that's it. That's all you have, right? But and I was actually thinking about sort of incubators, like startups that join incubators, right? Like say what you will about all of the infrastructure and the investment, whatever. Like I'm not going to, there's many different ways to build companies, but the community, I think, is one of the most valuable parts, where you've got a whole bunch of other, you know, founders, lead engineers, like whatever, first engineers sort of thing, who are talking to each other, right? And that conversation will happen in the first week. Like, wait, you're not planning to ship for 3 months? Like we've already put out 8 revs of our product, and you're like, oh my goodness, we are not going to keep up. What are we doing wrong, right? How do we build our system in a way that we can move like other folks are moving, right? And that willingness to share, I think, is huge. And it's also, I guess, in a way, self-selectively not conflicting, which is very important, right? Like if I said, hey, we want to go talk to these other people who are like our number one competitor, you know, maybe my boss is gonna be like, I don't think we should do that. But, you know, those communities are sort of designed in a way to prevent that from being the case. Anyway, I think that's great advice. I mean, even at all levels, because I was going to say, even as a CTO, right? Truthfully, as a leader in an organization, you really, regardless of size of organization, you're often the one person doing that job. Yeah. And the only place you're going to find someone who's doing something similar is to leave the building, the metaphorical building, right? To go find someone. And I happen to participate in a few large groups just for that, just to say, hey, like, have you seen something like this before? Yeah. Do you have any ideas? And often, you know, it is a hard job. Often the answer is not, oh, silly. Everyone knows the answer to that. It's right here. It's more like, that is hard, but maybe I have some, like, let's work on it together. Let's just talk it out. And just having that kind of support, I think, is super valuable. Okay, so we talked a ton about change, right? And like what's been happening over this last 5 years, and pandemic, everybody shift to remote, then it's hybrid, and some people are returning, and then we had these massive scale ups, and then a bunch of layoffs, and like it has been and then, you know, and then AI dropped, and everyone was like, what even do we do? That's a pretty remarkable rate of change over, I guess, the last 5 years. And I feel like every year at the end of the year, you know, we do, like, I'm reflecting, I'm like, that was a rough one. Next year will hopefully be a little more mellow. And it hasn't happened yet. I mean, do you think this is the new normal, this rate of change? Should we all be adapting to how to live in that world?
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, one of the university courses I studied, I went to Bond University in Australia, and they force you to do a subject from every school. And one of the ones that struck with me was cultural ethical values, where we study different philosophies each week. And I think one of the ones that stuck with me was Taoism, and that sort of is the one with the yin yang symbol, right? And one of the concepts there is that sort of you go through periods where there's like stability and lots of change as well. Or, you know, there's this idea of like, if you value something as a constant, because the nature of the world is to change, then naturally when something, whatever you value is a good thing and it goes away, you'll see that as a bad thing. And I sort of tend to think about that when it comes to this rate of change as well, is that, you know, I think if I think about, say, the 10s at the beginning of that, for me, yes, there was some changes like cloud engineering, but like companies and economic, economies were very successful, like open, lots of investment. Today, we have a lot of uncertainty with couple of wars, different things that are going on, what's going on. And for me, I like to go back to this idea of maybe that's just the cycle that we're in right now, where there's just a lot of change. And, that's definitely one of the sort of constants. And I hope maybe it will slow down at some point. I don't know. I don't know. The other sort of side is another philosophy, which is also very popular today, Stoicism, which talks about focusing on your sort of sphere of control and influence. So again, yes, there's all this change that's going on, but like putting a lot of worry into what might be is that something that you can really control or influence? It's one of those things also for leaders. It's really important because you always end up with too much stress about either decisions or things that you can't control or influence. And once you've accepted that something is beyond your sphere of influence, then you kind of feel a little bit lighter about it. It's like, well, actually, there's nothing I could have done to have affected that. Maybe that will help me with that as well. And so, I think when you are trying to navigate that change, yes, I think technology has always changed. Yes, it feels like it's a lot faster. I'm not very good with predicting the future, so I don't know how much faster it's going to be. I can't guarantee that. But I think the other side is, again, looking at it as new opportunities for growth, focusing on how much time that you can invest in that. I think it's everyone's individual responsibility to continue to invest in themselves, to stay on top of technology. I hope your organizations can also invest in giving you time and support for doing that. But regardless of that, you need to invest in that if you want to be a professional in our industry. I really do believe that. But again, focus on the things that you can do and you can control and influence. And other than that, there's not much else you should need to worry about, right? Like, it's a bit of a roll of the dice, and sometimes there's good luck, sometimes there's bad luck. But again, if you couldn't have done anything, then you did your best that you could. Yeah.
Well, shout out to your university/college for forcing you. I like that word, for setting the expectation that you'll branch out. I mean, I studied engineering, and we had a very small amount of room, to do other classes, electives, and it was very much up in the air, your choices. And I think most people optimized for smallest amount of work, given how much work we already had to do. Yeah. But, we don't get into philosophy very often on this podcast, maybe as a result, right? As a result of that thinking. And I think what makes, honestly, great leaders, great ICs, great coaches, like great everybody, is that we bring more to the table than this linear perspective of like, this is engineering and this is software and this is how we do software, right? It's like being able to take a step back. And I just like, I want to appreciate that response. I'm not good at predicting the future. None of us are. Anyone that's telling you they are, like, please stop listening to them because they don't know. Some people will try to tell you and they will try to take your money for it, right? But rather, yes, it's a high rate of change. Maybe it's going to get faster. Here are the ways that you can sort of think about that and come, have peace with that, focus on the things that you can control, build yourself, and be in a position where you can succeed in that environment, I think is a massive, massive takeaway. Anyway, love that. Thanks so much for joining me, for everything that you contributed to this, everything that you contribute. I mean, we talked about technology being a place where people give back, learn, and then put that out in the world so other people can learn from it. And again, you've been a huge contributor to that. Thanks to everyone who's listening. If there's anyone you want us to talk to, something you want us to talk about, find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the fastest way to get to me. I will totally take your recommendations, particularly if you can introduce me. And of course, if you enjoyed the podcast, subscribe on your podcast provider of choice. Pat, thank you again. This has been awesome. Thanks for spending some time with me.